I just want to start with that debt ceiling issue this week. Clearly, markets were a bit spooked about it. There's been a deferral until December. Just explain your feeling as to the way this goes, given the fact, of course, that the Democrats have control of both houses of the Congress there.
Well, look, I think we always knew, Ross, that it was going to be increased. It's been increased about 98 times since 1917 it was going to happen. But the problem with this ceiling is, of course, as it gets closer, both sides see an opportunity to try to humiliate the other side. And so we saw that again. The Republicans obviously trying to cast the Democrats as spendthrifts. But they blinked, obviously. They saw sense and they've given a deal. But as you suggested, it's just a deal until December, and it just specifies a nominal amount. So the same problem is going to arise, the same political problem is going to arise once again in just a couple of months when they have to increase it once again. I mean, the problem for the Democrats is that they have such a slim majority. I mean, they barely have a majority at all in the Congress. In the Senate, they have 50 of the 100 votes, and they need the vice president's casting vote to pass things through this somewhat obscure process called a reconciliation. So they can actually increase the debt ceiling by themselves, but they preferred a Republican support, which would need another 10 Republican senators to get to 60, because it makes it much faster. And they have such a big agenda otherwise at the moment, the Democrats. They're trying to get through these enormous infrastructure bills, and they've so far failed to do that. And we're seeing in the polls, President Biden's polling has really fallen very rapidly in recent weeks. I mean, the White House must be very disappointed.
It's going to be interesting just to see exactly how that pans out because, of course, as you say, they're deferred until December, but it could be that just spooks markets as they get closer to that next deadline that they've created for themselves. Yeah, look, indeed, in terms of markets, I mean, they've been a little bit rocky, but certainly there've been none of the crashes that people expect around September, October, November. So far, everything's fine. They're still extraordinarily expensive. There's no damage yet from the prospect of so-called tapering from the Federal Reserve, although that is certainly in prospect. So yeah, it's still an eerie calm, I would say, in financial markets. I mean, there's a lot of cash there waiting for a crash, but it hasn't happened. Just take me to one small thing, and I do note this week, and we've actually mentioned on the program already, and that is there's a fundamental difference of opinion about the way the economies are panning out in Australia versus New Zealand. New Zealand raising rates this week, Australia basically saying we're not raising rates, touching rates until 2024. It really is interesting to see that there is a fundamental difference in two countries that are so close and so similar.
Yeah, look, that's interesting. I mean, I think fundamentally, though, I mean, Australia and New Zealand, especially New Zealand, I mean, their interest rates are going to be largely determined by the global interest rate. And, when the Federal Reserve starts raising rates, you're going to see central banks all around the world essentially having to start doing the same thing. And the outlook is that your rates are going to still be low for at least a year, 2 years. I mean, of course, that can change quickly. But, we know since the global financial crisis, so many people predicted rampant inflation, myself included, and we were all wrong and rates remain very, very low. So although I do think inflation is going to emerge and rates will go up, you can't predict these things. Who knows?
No, it's interesting. And I know this week you've been to Boston, the meeting of the International Airlines Association, IATA. Now, one of the interesting things you came out of that is about the delays that many Australians, as reopening occurs, that they won't be expecting as they get access to international flights for the first time.
Yeah, look, that's right. It was a fascinating conference, the first one in 2 years because of COVID, and basically most of the world's top CEOs from airlines were there, including Alan Joyce. He was there. I got to catch up with him. There were a number of surveys, a lot of interesting information. They laid out their zero carbon emissions by 2050, which I think is almost customary now. Somewhat pie in the sky plan, I think, kind of dependent on hydrogen planes and electric planes and so forth. But yeah, they also had this fascinating survey that suggested with all of these COVID rules around the world for flying, whether it's vaccination tests, pre-COVID tests, post-flight tests, restrictions on destinations and so forth, the wait time at both ends of the flight would increase from 1.5 hours to about 6 or 8 hours unless governments radically simplified their restrictions.
Adam Creighton from Washington, always great to have you on the program, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks very much.